So, a long time ago, I told you that I was going to give you my assessment of why the Democrats lost that last election to a convicted felon. Uh, and I've been giving the matter a lot of thought, and I still come back to the same conclusion. It's really about this whole uh, diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's really what happened was the Democrats painted themselves into a corner with that issue, with affirmative action, and the Democrats and the Republicans just ran with it. And as a result, we are losing and have lost a huge part of the traditional Democratic base, which is white blue collar workers. Now, we've always had trouble with rural voters. I don't know why, because I remember when Roosevelt came in with the rural electrification, and all those people in the South said, "Yeah, we love Roosevelt because he gave us something." And when they stopped getting stuff, they went back to their old habits, which is basically not liking black people and thinking that the Democratic Party is all for black folk. So we have now really kind of lost it. And I say we, the Democrats have lost the white rural vote and the white blue collar vote and the white young male vote. So why? Well, we live in a strange time for racial relations. Those of you who haven't read Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, shame on you. And I say that because when I started thinking about this, I realized I haven't read it. I'm reading it now. But it starts off by saying it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I think that's where we are with racial relations right now. I think racial relations, particularly with black and white people, are better than they've ever been on an individual level. You see it all the time. When I was a kid growing up, you never saw black and white people together in a restaurant. Today, nobody notices. It's just common. You never didn't have black neighbors. Today, nobody notices. You didn't go to school with black people. You didn't have them in your clubs, and you didn't have a black doctor or black lawyers. Now all these things are commonplace. Nobody notices. So, and I remember growing up in the 40s and the 50s how much white people really didn't like black people. They didn't want them in their neighborhoods, didn't want them in their houses. It was common for white people to go to parties and use the N word frequently. Now nobody does that unless it's in some rural pockets of the deep South, which I have not visited in a while. So it's like the relations are really good now between the races in terms of individual one-on-one seeing people interrelate with each other. Um, but yet, as far as looking at each other as groups, we've never been further apart. So I'm watching Abby Phillips, and she's a fine young black girl, and she's on CNN. And I think she went to Harvard Law School. I'm not sure, but very bright, very articulate. She's a Democrat, and I generally agree with her on her perspective. And on this show, she has kind of a mix of MAGA people and Democrats. So the other day I'm watching, and they were talking about this recent Supreme Court hearing. Now, and this Supreme Court hearing had to do with affirmative action. It had to do specifically with whether or not a white woman, I believe she was straight, and believed that she was denied an employment or a raise or something because she was not a lesbian. And the judge instead went to a lesbian. So she brought an action under the federal anti-discrimination laws. Now, the Supreme Court heard that case, and they talked about it. And Sonia Sotomayor was on TV. I saw her talk about it, and she was saying this is one of the few instances where we all just unanimously agree on the issue. The issue wasn't whether or not this woman was going to win her lawsuit. The issue is whether or not she had a right under that statute to bring an action for discrimination, assuming that the discrimination is what you do before you get to the merits. You assume that the allegations are true, that she was denied her rightful spot because of her race. Because of her sexual orientation. And all the justices agreed that you can't discriminate against people just because they're a member of a majority under the law. and they were getting ready to send it back to the judge, to the court, to figure out, whether she had a factual basis. But as far as the fundamental legal principle is concerned, all the justices were in agreement with the fundamental fairness and basic understanding of any kind of statute. You can't have a statute that says, "Oh, here are rights that only go to minorities, but majority people can't have those rights." You can't have a law like that. So the law is clear. You cannot discriminate against an individual based upon their sexual orientation or their race. Period. And white people and straight people have the same rights as anybody else to not be discriminated against based on something which is inherent to them and has nothing to do with their choices. So this was the subject to this discussion. Now, I'm watching this discussion, and there's a bunch of Republicans on it. I say a bunch, there's maybe 3 or 4 or 2, something like that. There's small numbers, but there's a group of Republicans, MAGA people primarily, not a black person in there. And then you had the people on the Democratic side. One white woman, and the rest were black. And I'm saying, okay, let's just see how this plays out. Well, sure enough, all of the white MAGA people said, of course she's got a cause of action, which is incidentally the same thing that all the Democratic appointed Supreme Court justices said as well, at least in the oral argument. So you'd expect that the Democratic side, represented by, I think it was one black man and 2 black women and a white woman, and black them including Abby Phillips, would have said the same thing. Fair is fair. No, they didn't. And as I'm sitting there listening to these people basically try to make a case as to why it's okay to discriminate against white people, and the issue didn't involve race, but they took it that way because basically it was minority, that a majority person should not have those rights. Why? Because their reasoning was, well, over time, minorities, which includes blacks or gays or whatever, they've been discriminated against, and therefore to make up for that, people who have benefited from the discrimination against minorities, those people should not benefit. They should be punished. And I kept listening to them say this, and I was saying to myself, number one, you're killing the Democratic Party. No white person that I know would agree with that sentiment for 2 seconds. No member of a sexual majority would agree with that for 2 seconds. No right-thinking person would agree with that for 2 seconds. The way they kept getting there was to talk in terms of groups instead of individuals. Black people, white people. Well, when you're in a court of law, you're there as you, the person. Joe Blow is not Joe Blow, the representative of the white race or the black race or any sexual orientation. He's Joe Blow as a person. And Joe Blow should not be sacrificed for some greater perception as to widespread social wrong. You don't solve one wrong, as my mother used to say. 2 wrongs don't make a right. A previous wrong against other black people unrelated to this incident, other gay people unrelated to this incident, may have been discriminated against. You don't make up for the discrimination against those people by discriminating against another person who had nothing to do with the discrimination against those people and never benefited at all from it. And you can't write laws which benefit certain people at the expense of others. Equal protection under the law. Equal protection under the law. And yet these people, to a person, were taking the position that white people and sexual majority people, but mainly they turned it into a complete matter about race, that white people should not be allowed to bring these actions under federal law. And I'm saying, this is why the Democrats are losing white people in droves, and the white people are still the majority in this country. You cannot talk that way. You cannot put Democrats, people supposedly speaking out as representatives of the Democratic Party, in favor of discriminating against white people and hope that they're going to vote for you down the pike. And that's what the Democrats have been doing in spades. And it drives me crazy because those of you who follow my other podcasts know that my issues are economic. They're not these social issues. They're the economic issues. And my issue always is that the Republicans, while talking about the national debt, are constantly exploding the national debt with these totally irresponsible tax cuts, and they're going to destroy this country, literally. They're going to destroy this country because it's going to be we're going to reach a point where almost all of our income, tax income, is going to pay interest on the national debt, and there won't be anything left to do anything else. So it's got to be stopped, and you don't stop by slashing taxes. That's where our focus should be. And instead of that, it's focused on, well, black people should be able to have superior rights to white people because da da da. So affirmative action is okay. Diversity, equity, inclusion are fine. Well, the courts are not seeing it that way, and it's for sure that white people are not seeing it that way, and neither are straight people seeing it that way. They do not want to be discriminated against. They don't want their kids being discriminated against because of what somebody else did 100 years ago. And they're right. And until the Democrats stop putting people like these people that have appeared on the Abby Phillips show, get them off the air, let them stop pretending they represent the Democratic Party, and put Democrats like me on there to say you're absolutely right, just like Sonia Mayer did. You're absolutely right. Discrimination is discrimination, and discrimination against white people is wrong. Discrimination against straight people is wrong. Just as discrimination against black people or gay people or trans, whatever they are, all of those things are wrong. And the Democrats should not be saying some of it's okay, but other is not. It's all wrong, and Democrats have got to stand up and stand for that proposition. They're not doing it. And in my opinion, that's why they lost that last election. And they barely lost it, but that's why they lost it. Meantime, the Republicans are doing them great favors by bringing the economy down around our knees. And that, I don't think that's the right expression. Bringing us to our knees. The stock market tanked again today. And the main reason is because they're concerned about the fact that, number one, the tariffs, but more significantly, Trump doesn't know what he's doing. And none of the people surrounding him, including Elon Musk, know what they're doing. There's people who have no real experience in government. They don't understand what the purpose of government is. It's not to make a profit. It's not to run like a business. It's to provide services to people. And the government's done a pretty good job of that. And they run around constantly distracting people with this diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's going to be merit, and not based on trying to better, which is true, but it's a distraction. And Trump is a master of distraction. I'm not distracted, and hopefully, if you listen to me, you won't be distracted either. So that's it for now. No more ranting and raving, but I watched that show and I said, like, good God, they're killing us with this stuff. Us meaning responsible Democrats who mainly wants to see some fiscal responsibility and sanity return to this government. Democrats do a pretty good job of it. Bill Clinton did a great job of it. Jack Kennedy did a good job of it. Joe Biden did a good job of it. They all do. Democrats do a pretty good job, but they don't do a good job of explaining what they're doing. And the reason is because they get lost in all of this entanglement with the diversity, equity, and yada, yada, yada. And they may or may not be on the right side of those issues, but those issues should not be driving the political discussion. Fiscal sanity should be driving the political discussion, and hopefully you will say that to your friends and neighbors. In the meantime, I gotta go to bed. It's getting late. I'm exhausted. I'm an old man. I'm tired. Oh, yeah, and I need a drink. I don't really need a drink. Okay, I don't really drink, but I like to pretend that I do. All right, enough of this nonsense. Good night.